There is a moment before every collapse that almost no one remembers because it happens quietly, without noise, urgency, or visible warning. Not the crash that fills headlines, not the panic that dominates memory, but the calm moment just before fear is released. It is the silence where life still appears normal, routines continue, and most people believe nothing serious can truly happen. History does not move randomly through time. It advances through repeating psychological patterns that shape behavior in advance. Across empires, markets, and civilizations, public panic is never spontaneous and never accidental. It is guided, shaped, and contained long before the population is allowed to feel it. Empires do not fear chaos itself, because chaos can be managed. They fear chaos that escapes control. Because the moment fear spreads freely, trust dissolves, obedience weakens, and authority begins to fracture. This silent mechanism is the loop that has repeated for centuries, long before it was ever named. Over time, a silent system emerged, not by deliberate design, but through repetition across crises, generations, and centuries. It was never written down or announced, yet it was refined each time fear was successfully managed and contained. This system follows 7 distinct stages, each targeting a specific human instinct under pressure and uncertainty. Once a population enters this sequence, collective behavior becomes increasingly predictable and easier to guide. This is not conspiracy, and it does not require secret coordination behind closed doors. It is psychology operating at scale, reinforced by institutions, incentives, and repetition. Behavioral economics, mass fear, and historical pattern recognition converge at this point. Different empires, different eras, yet the same sequence repeats with precision and consistency. This is the structure that allows public panic to be controlled without visible force. Over time, a silent system emerged, not by deliberate design, but through repetition across crises, generations, and centuries. It was never written down or announced, yet it was refined each time fear was successfully managed and contained. This system follows 7 distinct stages, each targeting a specific human instinct under pressure and uncertainty. Once a population enters this sequence, collective behavior becomes increasingly predictable and easier to guide. This is not conspiracy, and it does not require secret coordination behind closed doors. It is psychology operating at scale, reinforced by institutions, incentives, and repetition. Behavioral economics, mass fear, and historical pattern recognition converge at this point. Different empires, different eras, yet the same sequence repeats with precision and consistency. This is the structure that allows public panic to be controlled without visible force. Eventually, reality begins to surface through the cracks of the official narrative, slowly, unevenly, and without a clear breaking point. Prices rise, services quietly degrade, and systems show signs of strain, yet nothing is presented as urgent or decisive. Instead of clarity, confusion is introduced and then carefully maintained over time. Experts disagree publicly, forecasts contradict one another, and statistics are framed in selective, shifting ways. Optimism and warning are blended together in the same messages, creating constant cognitive friction in the public mind. This dissonance does not provoke action. It weakens judgment, drains confidence, and delays meaningful decisions. When signals conflict, people hesitate, question their own instincts, and begin searching for external authority. Waiting slowly replaces preparation, and uncertainty itself becomes a stabilizing force. Confused populations rarely rebel. They pause, adapt, and that pause is what preserves control. At this stage, fear is no longer allowed to remain vague, abstract, or unfocused in the public mind. It must be narrowed deliberately, shaped carefully, and given a form that people can easily recognize. A specific threat is identified, named repeatedly, and placed at the center of every explanation and justification. Complex systemic failures are reduced to a single cause, simple enough to understand and emotionally process. An enemy emerges within the narrative, sometimes external, sometimes internal, sometimes invisible, but always defined. This narrowing is critical because diffuse anxiety creates instability, hesitation, and unpredictable behavior. Focused fear, by contrast, produces order, obedience, and coordinated collective response. When danger feels identifiable, centralized solutions begin to appear reasonable, logical, and even necessary. Freedom is rarely surrendered to fear itself, but to the promise of relief from that fear. Once fear has been clearly identified and narrowed, authority begins to expand in a visible and deliberate way across society. Institutions speak more often, with firmer language, greater certainty, and far less hesitation than before. Leaders become more present, more centralized, and more symbolically reassuring in moments of uncertainty. Messages emphasize responsibility, unity, discipline, and the necessity of following a single, coordinated direction. At this stage, authority does not silence dissent directly. Instead, it reframes it carefully and methodically. Questioning begins to appear irresponsible, skepticism feels dangerous, and open debate is labeled destabilizing. Most people are not seeking domination or control. They are seeking certainty, structure, and emotional relief. Authority provides that relief by offering order, direction, and the promise that someone is still in control. Even when outcomes worsen, obedience often increases because certainty feels safer than doubt or confusion. At this stage, fear is no longer hidden, denied, or suppressed, but it is never released suddenly or without control. Instead, it is introduced gradually, in carefully measured doses, timed to avoid shock, outrage, or collective resistance. Bad news arrives slowly, spaced across weeks or months, never concentrated into a single overwhelming moment. Each announcement slightly lowers expectations, quietly redefining what people consider normal, acceptable, or inevitable. A sudden collapse would provoke anger and rebellion, but a slow decline produces adaptation, resignation, and compliance. Human psychology adjusts remarkably well to worsening conditions when those changes happen incrementally rather than abruptly. Living standards decline, freedoms contract, and pressure increases, yet each step feels manageable when taken alone. Over time, what once felt unacceptable becomes routine, then expected, and eventually unquestioned by most people. Collapse no longer feels like collapse. It feels like life becoming heavier, slower, and permanently constrained. At this stage, behavior begins to change automatically, without the need for constant instruction or visible enforcement. Spending habits contract, risk tolerance collapses, and people adjust decisions around fear rather than opportunity. Dependence on systems increases, as uncertainty makes independent action feel dangerous or irresponsible. Gradually, individuals begin regulating one another through social pressure, moral judgment, and silent conformity. Control no longer requires force, because the population now enforces stability on itself. Fear becomes internalized, shaping choices, conversations, and expectations long before authority intervenes. People adapt their lives around limits they did not formally choose, but have learned not to challenge. Over time, panic no longer threatens the system. It adjusts to the system and reinforces it. The structure appears stable, not because fear is gone, but because fear has been fully absorbed. When the cycle reaches this stage, attention shifts away from responsibility and toward moving forward at any cost. The crisis is reframed as an unfortunate chapter rather than a sequence of deliberate decisions. Narratives soften, timelines blur, and causes dissolve into vague explanations that resist accountability. Public memory fades unevenly, retaining emotions while losing the details that once demanded answers. Mistakes are normalized, outcomes are justified, and consequences are quietly absorbed into daily life. Institutions survive by rewriting continuity, presenting adaptation as resilience and loss as necessary transition. People accept the new baseline because revisiting the past feels exhausting and unproductive. What was once shocking becomes historical, then abstract, then irrelevant to present choices. Amnesia does not erase collapse. It stabilizes it by making repetition possible again. Empires do not collapse because people panic. They collapse because confidence is mismanaged slowly over time. Fear itself is never the real danger, because fear can be directed, contained, and even made useful. What truly threatens systems is uncontrolled awareness, when populations begin recognizing patterns before authority does. Throughout history, power has survived not by eliminating fear, but by deciding how, when, and where it appears. This is why the same sequence repeats across centuries, cultures, and political systems with remarkable consistency. The algorithm does not depend on ideology, morality, or conspiracy. It depends on predictable human psychology. As long as people seek safety, certainty, and relief more than truth, the structure remains stable and repeatable. Each cycle ends quietly, not with dramatic collapse, but with a new equilibrium that feels permanent and inevitable. Until pressure builds again, awareness returns, and the algorithm resets, ready to run once more.